I'm a fan more of keeping the pH down, having the pools brushed, visited at least 2 or 3 times a week, and baby that thing at least for the first couple of weeks. The Plastering Council has proven that it takes a full 30 days for a newly plastered finish to cure. Curing meaning stable pH, stable alkalinity, stable hardness. Less than that, it's kind of like what they mathematicians would call an asymptote. The first 2 weeks, 60 or 70% of it's cured, then the next week another 20, and then the next week another 10, that type of thing. Further, they're in bold print say do not add salt or a chlorine generator to the system for the first 30 days. Mainly because it's going to be a very quick pH increasing influence in addition to the natural curing aspect of the pool. And this is common knowledge, just want to review it, make sure everybody knows to be patient with newly plastered pools. The more rapid the tendency to raise the pH, the quicker there'll be a tendency for a trace of minerals to sit and start making some streaking, browning. Because don't forget, what we're talking about is a curing where the pH right on the surface of this curing plaster is higher than what you're measuring in the water. Years ago, I did trapdoor experiments, and there's a lot of difference between what's happening right on the surface in a plaster pool versus just scooping of water. The biggest difference, though, happens to be in the level of chlorine. If you scoop, even an arm's length down, you get a chlorine reading in a pool. If you were to create a little trapdoor approach where you could strap something to a pole and truly take a sample off the floor, you'd find that the sanitizer level is way lower than it is on the surface. Even if we think the pool is homogenized, because chlorine and bromine tends to rise up out of the water. And if sitting, there will be a difference. It makes a lot of common sense because algae tend to form on the bottom. That's where they tend to form. Yeah, oh sure, you'll see algae getting into cracks and developing over a long period of time in tile, places where they can kind of root in and harbor, but the loose algae will tend to form on the bottom first because that's where there's the least protection. So the circulation system, especially in above ground pools, to kind of suck from the top and return to the top is not a good recipe. You want to get that water homogenized. When we have a good swim season like last year, my workload drops every year, last 20 years. The worst is because when people are using their pool, they're getting much better homogenizing, and quite frankly, they're probably sweeping a little bit of algae and debris up by the use of it into the skimmer, into the filter, and you're not seeing it. You leave a pool unattended, and you'll start seeing films, and your protection, so brushing, as hard as it is to get homeowners to do, is the only way to provide that extra circulation necessary. So in a poor swim season, we always get more problems. I'm sure you do as well.
We have a product called, I think it's called Circulator. And it's for pools that have eyeball fittings for returns. And you take the eyeball out and you screw this thing in, and it's like a turbo.
Oh, okay.
And it spins around and it spreads water. I mean, you can see, I mean, the water goes everywhere.
Does it drill it down also?
Yeah. It
For
goes
the most part,
corners, bottoms, everything. And it's only about $30.
Well, that sounds good. We just simply ask people, look, it's pretty to ripple the water, but it's much better for your water to drive
That's what it does.
turn the jet down.
Yeah. It spins
down.
around in
Does it aerate it
360
as well?
degrees. 360 degrees it spins, but it's very strong.
There you go. So somebody is, tried to capitalize on the need to keep good circulation.
Right. But we've shown it to our customers, but a lot of the pools around here have bottom returns, and it doesn't work in a bottom return. You can't screw it into a bottom return.
Oh, no, okay. Bottom returns, wow.
Yeah.
It's like the old in-floor master pools.
Yeah, well, no, just regular returns. Hayward has one with a plate on it. And
as opposed to bottom drains.
Yeah, water comes around through the crack in the plate, and then SwimQuip's had an old one for years.
I think that's a good idea. That's a good thing to have.
Yeah.
I would actually like to see people draw more than they skim. The desire, draw from the bottom, if they
Yeah.
could divert the water and suck as much from the bottom as possible, I think is actually healthier. But the desire to ripple and have pretty water and, of course, move floating stuff over to get caught, like a pool sweep approach, is quite irresistible.
Well,
It's just not that as effective.
this product actually moves the water everywhere, top and bottom, middle, everywhere. They have a light type thing that they take a picture of, and you can see the light going all
As
the
part of their
different-
promotion.
the corners of the pools and everything.
Let me capitalize the thought there. Here's something we've done in testing, because I just need to do these type of things in the business. I've taken dye, bouillon cubes. Now I'm talking winterizing for a second, or water that's been uncirculated for a lengthy period of time. And do you know that by natural forces, dye will migrate and homogenize over a fairly quick period of time? So it says good things about if you do winterize and don't have the opportunity to paddle around or move around, most of the chemicals will migrate and homogenize during the course of the time. The danger, I might say, about doing that is where you might have two chemicals in high concentration next to each other. We've seen plenty of pools come in the spring where a chlorine shock, for example, has reacted with the algicide and made like a brown film. You've negated that. In general, away from that, the concept's the same. If you're going to shock and come back with an algicide, the most common combination for algae treatment at any time during the year, you want to separate the treatments as much as possible and have the water homogenized as much as possible. You don't want to hit and go. To a minimum, I'd like to see 2 hours separation, and the chlorine treatment being first. Chlorination or bromination or any oxidation is a broad-based shotgun approach, kind of like a gladiator in Rome with the thing swinging around. Whatever it touches, it's going to try to hit and interfere with. You certainly don't want to have it interfere with algicide you put in. At a minimum, we found that 2 hours gives the chlorine plenty of time in a well-homogenized situation, such as putting shock in front of a return jet, perhaps putting into the skimmer, anything, or broadcasting it very carefully and then grooming it around is adequate. Some people like to go further and say, well, one day do this and then the second day. That's not going to work for service.
Yeah, I mean, I can't wait 2 hours.
All right, if you're caught into that mode where you got to hit and go, and you want to apply 2 products, and one of them's chlorine, if it's, for example, algicide and sequestrant, you're golden. There's no interreaction.
Right.
If one of them is an oxidizer, you're into the risk zone. You know that you're going to waste some of the treatment. Now, in the case of mineral control products, it's too high of a risk. You can't do it. You've got to kill the chlorine, period, and then put in your sequestrant for mineral control. And you've got to function for a few days without chlorine to allow the chemicals are too sensitive. Chlorine will rip them up. Doesn't matter and the powders are worse than the liquids. The powders will get ripped up quicker. That's why in the natural chemistry product line, for example, they have a powdered product called, stain free, very expensive stuff. And then you come back and you're supposed to use another product to control it. So one removed the discoloration but didn't get rid of it, and the next one grabs onto it. So it's a double-barreled product.
Yeah.
All of that needs to be done without chlorine in the water. That's why stain removal is best suited for early or late, when you don't have a lot of biocidal need. If you're trying to do stain removal during the heat of the season, good luck, it's tough. You've got to prep the pools with a lot of algicide, particularly poly 60, first. Hope for the best, because you're likely to start after a few days, get some hazing anyway. But if you got to do it then, you got to do it then. That's a sidebar. But aside from that situation, if you take a chlorine and a chlorine and an algicide, shock and an algicide, I'm okay with that. I've done it a million times myself. I just do the best I can to quick paddle around and try to homogenize it. Now, you're going to want to homogenize your shock as well as possible in a liner or fiberglass pool for safety reasons anyway. Even in a plaster pool, I have photos over the years, many times where I've seen shock applied, and wherever it hit, there were black dots and streaks. Anybody ever see that? It's in the plaster, it goes away. If you ever encounter that, be patient, it will self-rectify. Right where it hit, the pH is so high and the oxidizing value is so high, you actually can make blackish streaks. It will fade away and go away. Rather rare, but I have seen it. Other than that, and all you're concerned about is losing some of your chlorine, your algicidal value because of the shock. Now, the Poly 60 is going to hold up the best, technically, in the presence of chlorine. It's the most expensive choice, but it's the most durable choice. Copper is risky. It's pretty well controlled, but the chlorine wants to rip away the controller. So I wouldn't do it with copper. Shock and copper aldehyde, not good. Shock, that's the worst. Shock with the more economical aldehyde that has a little bit of foam is okay. Shock with Poly 60, the best if you're in that hit and go mode. Now, then there's one other aldehyde choice which is actually supposed to work with the shock. I'm talking about the sodium bromide granular packets that works with the shock. You're actually creating a bromination temporarily as a medicinal value, and that combo is best suited for mustard algae. It's one of the nationally recognized choices. And while we're mentioning mustard algae, because that's probably the biggest in-season issue, algae issue, the most common combination, and I must say that the EPA does not distinguish, use this for this, use this for that. The manufacturers present the data to the EPA and say, my algicide is good for everything. So most of and then the other guys say, my algicide is good for everything. Well, that doesn't leave us in decision making with a whole lot of, so we kind of do it as we go along. Yes, they're all technically approved to kill all types of algae. That's what it says. And they have data, they say, that supports that. We as packagers aren't allowed to make these things up. We have to take by law, EPA law, that information, put it on the label. But for the most part, for the mustard algae, we're seeing copper resurging as a good application, and we're seeing the sodium bromide granular to be used with the shock treatment as a good application. One caution with sodium bromide as an adjunct application with shock is the bromide doesn't go anywhere. I'm talking about what we call yellow shock and clear, yellow out, yellow treat. There's a whole, typically they'll have the word yellow on the label. It's always a granular problem, except for that liquid, no more problems. That's also sodium bromide. But the bromide builds up and doesn't disappear. And if it builds up and you use it, you eventually messes with your cyanuric stabilizer, and you will blow off and your chlorine reading will disappear. So that's the one side of it. You can only use that yellow product with a shock maybe 3 or 4 times a season. Maximum, I think, a half a dozen times statistically for the life of the water. Well, if you're fresh in the pool a lot, great. Then you can use it a little bit more frequently. And that seems to get the job done for those people who want to use that approach. In the case of Poly 60, there is no buildup.